And so now I think we have Tyler and Greg. And so I think we want to get hear you. Thank you very much for preparing this and very interesting, papers that you had in Journal Big History and nice position paper. And if you'd like to, take the stage and present that, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Certainly. Tyler and I have been working, and we sort of agreed I'd give a brief summary, and then Tyler will fill in. And then we are certainly looking for this to be interactive. And so I was thinking I'd give maybe a 10-minute overview, and then Tyler can fill in. We haven't prepared like a talk per se because we're really thinking about this as being dialogical, interactive, etc. Um, so it was a real pleasure. I'm very thankful. I am getting a little feedback. I don't know if anybody else is getting feedback on,
Yeah.
but
So if you turn your mics
yeah,
off,
I'm going to mute. Okay. So, anyways, great. I really appreciated the fact that we got hooked up. It's been very fruitful for me. I had read sort of somewhat carefully, but then really read very carefully Tyler's work. And as I did, I really saw an enormous amount of potential parallel. And I think I'll say that I think that there's a lot, and I'm certainly not alone in this. I'm sure there's a sense. There's a lot of sense that we need to upgrade our fundamental frames of understanding. I'm in the midst of that in psychology. I think I'm in a number of different groups that are in the process of transformation. And so for me, the idea that big history might go through a transformation towards a big history 2.0 is really exciting and very hopeful. I have long said, ever since I encountered big history, that if we're going to organize our knowledge and understanding scientifically in a way that is also affords us a frame humanistically, we need that big picture view that goes from time by complexity. And at the same time, I was always under the impression, given my own journey in relationship to this, that the thresholds model of big history genuinely it was a bit confusing or at least inelegant. It was simple and useful for pedagogical purposes, but it didn't really do the task of really mapping the terrain in a way that was specific enough to hold the complexity. And so that's one of the things that I've studied a lot of history of big picture views, both in psychology and in general. We have a real challenge in getting a big picture view that's up to the task of holding it simple enough so that people can relate to, but it's also being rich and deep enough so that when the experts get in, they say, well, actually, when you really look at it this way, it's kind of BS, and you get this kind of lump all stuff together. So we have some degree of coherence, but then you split it and it doesn't really work when you get into the specifics of the richness of the detail. And generally, what's happened, certainly in our field of knowledge, is mostly the splitting has worked. So we have a chaotic, fragmented pluralism, but we do not have a fundamental grip that we, as sort of the academy, can share in and say, hey, when you come to the academy, this is your basic worldview. I'm of the opinion that if you look at the Enlightenment, essentially what happened is that we split the world accidentally, even though we know it's one world, we split it into matter and mind, more or less, and we certainly never gave it a big picture view. I believe that we can give it a big picture view of energy to matter to life to mind to culture as an optimal gripping view. And I think we can specify the nature of that trail with the kind of flexibility, and coupled to precision that really is up to the task of having a grammar that speaks to our worldview. And there was some discussion of the whole SETI paper and everything else. It's like, yeah, this might be a really crucial time. So hopefully we can get a good optimal grip on the world that does right to our science and does right to our spirit and our morality, etc. So I was super thrilled to connect with Tyler and see a remarkable set of overlaps with his vision of quirks to culture and meta patterns, by the way, and the work that I was doing on the tree of knowledge and my overall unified view. So what we're proposing here is a shift from the thresholds to a new frame of reference for thinking about emergence. And we're making 5 core points that we think take the system from the threshold view to a much richer and view that's still graspable by a system, of thinkers from a wide variety of different domains, and thus affords a coherent, integrated core that's also very rich and pluralistic in relationship to its capacity to be flexible and move based on new data. So the 5 key points are as follows. First, it isn't just time by complexity that we're really tracking here, but we're really interested in is it quirks to culture, to this moment, us as humans, what's going on in other galaxies or other alien groups, to the extent that that's happening. That's a different trail. And certainly we can look at various elements of complexification across the universe. But if we're trying to find our history, what we're really looking at is what Tylor rightfully identifies as combogenesis. So it's the trail from quarks to this particular culture. And there's a particular process, layering, when you do that, that creates a particular line of understanding. And there are things like then stars, okay, which are super important to provide a context. It's not irrelevant. But to think of it as a threshold to us, stars aren't really a threshold to us. So they're not really part of the combogenesis that gives rise to our capacity to be here in this combination indirect line. They're indirectly, of course, we obviously need the sun in relationship to the ecology that we live in. But so the first key point is a transition from thinking in relationship to complexity in general to combogenesis. My term for this is complexification. We can think about the actual, sort of nominal wording for our structure. But bottom line is there's a line here that's different from the whole process of complexification, complexity. So it's time by combogenesis or time by complexification. That is the sort of taxonomy. The second issue is when you look at that, you can see a layering of leveling, and this is the other thing that Tylor makes in Quirks to Culture, is that we can identify particular characteristics of levels that go from part to whole that are part of the combogenesis line, and these levels have particular characteristics that we can differentiate. And they're different from general aggregate development. So a general aggregate, hey, one car can't make traffic, lots of cars make traffic. So the cars to many cars make traffic, that's an aggregate phenomenon. But a leveling phenomenon is different. So that's a particle, say, to an atom, or an atom to a molecule. These are different levels of integration. Inside Tylor's book and in Meta Patterns and other places, he affords us a clarity about the nature of what a distinct leveling process is. So aggregates can be really important. They organize in particular ways. Levels can be part of aggregates, but a leveling process is importantly different than a simple aggregate process. Okay. And so to me, there's some aspects of thresholds like stars and galaxies that could be argued to be more aggregate rather than a particular level, especially not a combogenesis level. So here's a differentiation in relationship to a category that says emergence can happen through aggregates, and then levels. Levels are a particular kind of aggregate formation that's really important. So that's the second point that we make. The third point that we make is, and this is as Tylor went through his 12 levels of combogenesis, he then took a step back, and this is present in a number of different angles, I think, that really, and he saw that there's really a different kind of change that happens when we go from matter to life, and then when we go from the living organisms and animals into human culture. And then he identifies life as an evolutionary process and really human culture as a somewhat evolutionary process. And this gives rise to the argument that another different kind of emergence happens when we shift into what he called different realms of existence. So we have our aggregates and our levels, and then the levels give rise to realms. And these realms are really fundamentally different in certain regards. So we're going to say then that there's emergence of realms. I call these dimensions of complexification or planes of existence. Okay, I argued that matter was a plane, life was a plane, and culture. I also then, gives us to the next point, is that there is a plane or realm between living organisms and cultured persons, and that's minded animals. Okay, and I argued, and this is so that gives rise to another claim that we're making, which is really essentially missed in my estimation from a big history view. And I can explain why I think this is such an important thing from a psychologist who's interested really in the theoretical question of what is psychology? What is it the science of? And I argue that it's the science of mindedness or minded behavior. Minded behavior corresponds to this whole realm of minded animals. and this can be specified with a degree of clarity that's as differentiable from, say, life beneath it as life is from matter. And essentially, Aristotle saw this. Virtually every culture has a category for minded animals. It's a sensory motor looping function such that animals demonstrate a particular kind of functional awareness and responsivity. Notice I'm characterizing mindedness here not as subjective conscious experience of being, but a particular kind of behavior pattern in the world. I'm doing that because I would argue, and I think all of us at least have this kind of notion, big history is a scientific perspective. It's going to track the behavior patterns of the universe writ large. And thus we need to have a behavioral frame, of course, not to eliminate the subjective conscious experience of being, but one that affords us clarity in relationship to what we can make claims about from a scientific epistemological view. So this brings us to our fourth big claim, which is that not only are there levels and aggregates, there are particular kinds of levels. The levels then organize into different realms. These realms are different than levels. And then there are four different realms: matter, life, mind, and culture. Finally, we make a claim in relationship to the nature of the emergence of realms in particular. We can talk about this in terms of how broad in general it is, but the argument is that realms emerge as a function of, broadly speaking, evolutionary processes. And we can speak with confidence that there's a particular set of ingredients that go into the emergence of complexification of a realm, especially at the level of life. And I would argue, and Tylor now I think agrees, at the level of mind and at the level of culture. We are characterizing these to get an optimal grip on them as PVSR dynamics. That's propagation. So you have a propagating mechanism that's distributing potentialities. Within that propagating mechanism, there's important levels, kinds of variation. Those variations then distribute and then are selected, and then there's a process of retention, and that is the complexity building feedback loop of a general evolutionary process. We argue that this affords a particular optimal gripping on the underlying causal mechanisms that give rise to the growth of complexification across the different realms or planes or dimensions. And that brings us then to our proposal that we would then be able to say, well, what is big history fundamentally? Well, certainly we can study the universe, but the history, what we're looking at is how do we get from the hot inflationary Big Bang to the present? Well, ultimately, there's a trail of combigenesis. We differentiate. Yes, there's level aggregates that emerge, but there are particular kinds of levels. These levels can be traced in relationship to the levels that give rise to the material dimension. Then there's levels that give rise to the living dimension, levels that give rise to the minded animal dimension, and then culture. That's levels by aggregates, then into different realms. And in particular, there are PVSR dynamics, especially at the three realms of life, matter, and culture. I mean, life, mind, and culture, maybe at matter also. And this is a richer picture than the thresholds view. It shows, if you look at thresholds, they all classify levels and aggregates and realms. You get a life threshold, you get a galaxy threshold, you get an atom threshold. That's a level, that's an aggregate, that's at all the thresholds. So this differentiates. It gives us a descriptive taxonomy with a theoretical proposition, at least at the level of the nature of evolution, about what causes it. We think that this is an optimal gripping function, so we can go and share with people, hey, the universe is energy to matter to life to mind to culture. That's an adequate big history picture that's at an optimal grip for pedagogical purposes and should be up to the task of dealing with a lot of different complexity from a lot of different perspectives. If that's the case, it can give us a coherent integrated pluralism, change the grammar of our worldview, and really launch a big history 2.0. So that's my summary. Tylor, you want to chime in relation?
Very nice. Thank you. I think you're muted.
Tylor, we can't. You're muted, Tylor. Hello? Okay, try it. Nope. Oh
boy.
Nope, you're muted again.
Muted. Down at the bottom, the mic. Okay.
Nope, now he's not muted.
Trying.
Trying.
Lowell, is there anything that can unmute? Not sure. I think the three green dots mean it's trying to connect to audio and then it fails. Mm.
Usual. I mean, I see the microphone there as usual, but
We got it. We got it. We got it.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Go.
Okay. So let me just ask. So Max or Maximilian, are you're responding today? Is that right? Are you?
Yeah, I'm responding. I've responding, and Anton Grindon is responding.
Or Dave are people that are going to respond both here or? Well, now you're muted, Dave.
Dave, you're muted there.
Dave, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, Anton is here. I had a little bit of trouble. He's at the table.
Anton's here.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So because I don't see this is still not the standard Zoom I'm used to. So I can't get everybody. I only see 10 people, but I see 15 are on. So anyway, I'm going to be very brief because I want to hear what Max and Anton are going to say in response. Because Greg covered the main points. It's in our position paper. I do want to just emphasize the one thing of the evolutionary dynamics, however we want to call those, evo dynamics but some PVSR, propagation, variation, selective retention, as a theme that when it comes up in the big history trajectory from quarks to culture, it opens up a new kind of possibility space and new kinds of dynamics in the things that are operating with those kinds of evolutionary dynamics. And in my own work, the reason it was very easy to coordinate with Greg, in my own work, I had documented people involved with animal learning that had said animal learning is like an evolutionary process of trial and error, and then it gets in success, and then it gets more sophisticated. And in my own mind, I was saying, well, if I was really consistent with taking evolutionary dynamics as what Greg sometimes calls a joint point or a major transition point, then the animal with a nervous system would be one of these transitions. So that's why in our position piece, it's four kind of realms. I'll use the word I was using before, but Greg is calling it dimensions, and there's not an obvious English word for it that we all can immediately agree on. That could be discussed as well. So I just want to emphasize that point. This meta pattern or recurring pattern of evolutionary dynamics as a way that we can help that big history can become scholarly in a certain sense, because that can be debated and expanded and built upon and talked about if that is seen as some kind of ways of making transitions. So I just want to emphasize that one point, and otherwise I'd really like to have Dave go and get the responses going, because I know people have thought about this, and we'd like to see what people are thinking.
All right, very good. Can we get Anton to the stage? Anton, if you could raise your hand, or Lowell, if you can try to get him. Yeah, I don't see Anton as part of this group. I know that he's having a little bit of a problem keeping a stable connection again. So first of all, I just want to thank Greg and Tylor for putting this together. I think it brings up very many interesting aspects, and I think I really appreciate the fact that the tree of knowledge has four phases. I think that's been something that we needed in there, and I believe a lot of other people were kind of pushing around that idea, and Tylor with combinogenesis and the processes. I think that coming together with some aspects of developing something beyond the thresholds is a good way of doing it. I think there's, even though this is a good set, I don't think it's necessarily complete, and I think you addressed that. But I think this is a good step forward in this. One of the things that I think in combinogenesis is that I think there's other ways to develop complexity besides combining together in organization. I think organization itself, which combinogenesis kind of addresses, is just one of the major features of complex adaptive systems, along with information. But I see information as being tied to the tree of knowledge, that that is the evolutionary steps, or evolutionary processes where major things change. So I see that in that part. And then energy, definitely one aspect of it, and it's energy which is a necessary but not sufficient condition, or energy flow, which is needed for complexity rise. And that's not, that can be integrated in there. And so looking at the full aspects of complex adaptive systems as they evolve and show emergence through changes in organization, the information, the energy, and the environment in which they evolve. And just one more point, and that is, and this is something that I had missed before, and rereading this and thinking about this, is that those first, I think, 5 stages going from quarks to molecules, none of those are complex adaptive systems, and none of those are dissipative systems, right? It was the environment that was, okay, Tylor disagrees. So I'll just leave it like
Well,
that.
no, sorry, I'm agreeing. You're right. No,
Oh, okay,
Right,
okay. I just, thanks for the
Mhm.
clarification.
you're right, Dave. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. I want to add, yes, I agree.
Okay. um, and so to me, just reviewing this again, I had put in that this showed complexity as it kind of grew and combined together, and that's really not so. They're equilibrium systems without any energy flow. Um, and I think for big history, we do want to, track our progress, where we've come from, but also the conditions that led to it, which I think is the environment. And so I think we need to keep that coupling somehow in there. Max, would you like to
Can I?
make some
Would it
comments?
would it be okay for me just to pop in just very briefly
Oh,
and
yes,
say
yes.
so? At least I'll speak from Tyler and I have been dialoguing about this. I think we're in pretty close agreement. There's still some things, of course, that we need to sort out. But I'll say from a tree of knowledge perspective, okay, the taxonomy that the tree of knowledge gives is as follows. I describe the first essence as an energy information implicate order. I take this from quantum field theory and the hot inflationary Big Bang. Essentially, the matter dimension can be collapsed into what I call an energy information implicate order. That places the concepts of energy and information as pretty foundational to the whole structure, out of which then the material object dimension emerges with class, that's mapped by, say, classical mechanics and matter and motion. And then that then gets picked up by a living organism, which then becomes a complex adaptive system. And then there's an animal, which is a sort of meta complex adaptive system. And then there's a person and society, cultures that are meta adaptive on that, basically. And those complex adaptive systems are fundamentally different. And the vision logic of the cones is the process by which they are processing information and creating communication networks. And that is radically different than what's happening at the matter dimension. We can talk
Yeah.
more about what is energy flow and entropy and neg entropy, et cetera, dissipative structures. But I would just say certainly that's my sort of metaphysical formulation. So what you're saying there is deeply congruent with
Yes,
what I would
I believe
hear.
so.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think I agree. Max, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And thanks, Tyler and Greg. I think I'm going to kind of ask a couple of questions on the way through, and then maybe give a broader critique if that's okay. You guys are doing, and it's symptomatic of a broader problem with the thresholds model that's been identified by Fred Spear in a recent article in JBH and kind of an ongoing debate in the field. That the thresholds model was never developed to be a kind of scientific taxonomy or any kind of thing of history. It's developed to be a teaching model, right? There's been quite a number of attempts over the years to overthrow the thresholds model, and I think they've all kind of failed for the same reason, which is that it's easy to understand the thresholds model. It's easy. It's an easy way in. Now, I think I really a kind of overarching field that allows, or an overarching way of thinking that allows kind of academics and non-academics even from outside any area or from any area of expertise to then come in and have a kind of broader view of the universe. I think in order to do that, it needs to be really kind of simple and easy to understand for academics across the academy, or people across the academy. So the first question I really had was, and this is something I think we all struggle with generally, and I don't think we're ever going to come to an agreement on this, but I think it's important that we have a clear kind of statement of what we think complexity is. So I was wondering if you guys could give me a kind of single sentence, jargon-free definition of complexity as you've used it in your model.
I'd like to just say something about that because can you hear me, by the way? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
I think Ken Solis brought up last time that you can find websites that there's dozens of definitions of complexity, and that's true. It's been many years since I've looked into those because I see they're all over the place. But this is a complexity that would be numbers of numbers of levels of nestedness in a thing, so that so that an animal body has within it eukaryotic cells, which has within it prokaryotic cells, which has within it molecules in downward. So I am supporting, not that this is the definition of complexity. There are many, these algorithmic complexities and power law network complexities and fractal complexities, and it's not of no interest to have these definitions of different definitions of complexity. But I think in terms of big history, there's a particularly intriguing way to see. So it's particularly important to big history, I believe, to think of complexity as nested levels. There's a biologist at Duke University, Dan McShay, has promoted this for a biological complexity. I think we had one of his papers last time, or one of his critiques of some of the other definitions of complexity. Max, so I don't want to go on more than that, but I just wanted to acknowledge there's many ways to look at complexity. This is one that I and Greg are thinking is particularly important to big history, because for one thing, you can debate it, count it. It can be part of a research program to look at these levels.
I'll chime in, Max. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I certainly very much agree. The issue is pedagogy and being clear about pedagogy relative to science, and consider pedagogy as key. I used to think about complexity mostly in terms of Murray Gell-Mann's algorithmic information content. But my primary thing, what I would say to you is that I would, and obviously I'm biased here, but pictures can be worth 1,000 words for pedagogy. So if you ask what it is that I mean, for me, my answer is here's the tree of knowledge. That's what I mean. And with that, you can then create a vision lodging correspondence, and that you basically get exactly what Tylor just said is, oh, there's a layering process of levels in matter, and then there's a layering process of levels in life, and then there are a layering process of levels in mind and animals. And what you can then see is what I mean is a complexification of a layering process. So that's really what it is. And I think that if you pair that with a depiction, pedagogically and then scientifically, you can find yourself gaining lots of clarity and broad understanding.
Okay. And all right, thanks for that. And I think the kind of the big danger, and the reason I asked the question, I guess, is because the big danger, and a lot of big history models have received this critique before, that it's in some senses arbitrary where you've chosen. So I guess I don't really think that you guys have done this, but it's probably more for your own thinking than anything else. How would you defend against the claim that an increase in complexity is I know it when I see it?
But then, who is saying that?
Can I take it?
You're saying somebody's saying that to us?
Not to you, no. So this
I
being
know
said,
it.
Could I offer something?
Oh well, that's the other 20. Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that Herbert Simon back in 1962 essentially agrees with Tylor and Greg in that one way to measure complexity is by what he called levels of hierarchy. It's a 62 paper called The Architecture of Complexity. So this idea goes way back, and subsequent to that, Gell-Mann and many other people came up with different ways of measuring complexity. But what is complexity? What's the characteristic? And the books I've read pretty much, concur that complexity is hard to define in a sentence. It's the number. There's various qualities you look for. For example, a hurricane and a star are complex, but they're not adaptive systems. So some will leave out the criteria of adaptability. And from every system I can think of that is adaptive is either life or systems derived from life. So many people consider the internet to be a complex system because it is adaptive, but again, it's derived from humans that created the system, and we make it adaptive. So for me, a complexity, it becomes more and more certainly complex as it meets more and more of the criteria that people have identified that complex systems have, like interacting components that process information, like adaptability. There's 7 I listed in my paper on ethics, that ethics paper I wrote. But anyway, most systems meet all 7. Some don't. Again, especially adaptability. So for me, a complex system is a matter of meeting a number of criteria. And as far as measuring complexity, Mitchell, who's at Santa Fe Institute, says, no, I'm sorry, Seth Lloyd, I think. There's 40-some metrics he's had so far, and he hadn't counted Eric Chazon's energy level. So anyway, that's my 2 bits on that. Thank you.
I'd like to chime in and just reframe that question a little bit, okay? Because actually, my life's mission is centered around a question: is what is psychology? Okay, and there are not a lot of psychologists here in Big History, but I'll simply tell you that we don't know the answer to that. We psychologists, okay. So if you want my retort to the model of, what's your model and why is it valid? It's because it solves the problem of psychology. And then if you can't even solve, you guys think you got problems with complexity, okay? We're not even in the mag of disagreement in relationship to what psychology refers to in the world is far profounder, I would argue, because there's fundamental differences like, is it mental or is it behavioral? and my history discipline. And there's a radically different, even metaphysical ways to build the world. Okay. And that never really get resolved. So my point would be, hey, there is a profound question that is not answerable. There are a lot of different ways to cut up complexity. And I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that. But if you can't define the word psychology, my argument is you're not going to have a coherent synthetic philosophy, big picture view. And so at least the tree of knowledge is definitely non-arbitrary with regards to that fundamental question. And it really kicks it back and says, hey, if you can't deal with that, you're going to be in trouble with a coherent big picture view. So that's at least one pitch for the way in which the tree of knowledge at least maps its levels and dimensions of complexification. It answers the question, what is psychology? And that's a pitch, at least, for what it does in a non-arbitrary way.
Very good. Thank you. I think Anton is here now. Anton, can't see you, but hopefully we can hear you. Oops, he just left. I know he's been having some problems. I think he's still at the table.
So Max, Anton's coming back up. Max.
Sorry, say again.
And while you're figuring that out, Dave, I just want to make sure have Max assess. He did have other questions, and then he had a general, a bigger picture comment too. Max, you were preparing.
So Max, did you want to continue?
Yeah. So I mean, there was. So I guess I can go two ways with this, depending on when Anton comes back and what he wants to say, and perhaps I can circle back to it later with email and stuff. I think my general big picture question, accessibility to people across the academy. I'm pretty familiar with, we're all pretty familiar with this kind of discussion. I got a little bit lost in the levels and the aggregations and stuff, and the combogenesis as well. I think I've got my head around it now, but I think it was quite difficult to find. It was quite difficult to find a way in to start with. So I wonder if there's a way more accessible across the academy. But I think in terms of more specific stuff, I wanted to ask Greg about something, about the mind classification. I wanted to ask whether brain would be a more appropriate term to be using for what you're describing here, rather than mind, to avoid that confusion with consciousness.
Right. Well, the short answer is no. In some ways, it's sort of yes, in the sense that there's an intuition, but that's really because the grammar that we achieved coming off the Enlightenment is either physicalist or mentalist. And we really actually have to undo that grammar. So there's a lot at work. There's heavy lifting that needs to be done. You can't just say, oh, well, pedagogically, this is part of the, I think we need to come out and basically, the grammar of our thought is broken. Okay. The grammar of our thought is broken. Here's one thing I'll say. I know my significant other's mind. I don't know her brain at all. Okay. You could show me her brain. I would have no idea who she is. But I know who she is in relationship to her minded behavior, okay? Because I understand her functional awareness and responsivity. Functional awareness and responsivity is actually what you track when you hang out with your dog, okay? Although the brain is a mediating structural relation, it is not the whole thing any more than DNA is what we mean by life, okay? So mind is to life. Life and DNA are essentially mind and brain in the system. So I'm talking mind. When you go into the forest, what we should be seeing are minded animals and living trees. Okay, what you see is a squirrel grabbing nuts, and that's what you see, and that's minded behavior. And our grammar broke when we got read into consciousness and the Enlightenment split quality and quantity and created behavior versus the inside. And that did a lot of really good things for some things, but it created an enormous amount of complexity. Mindedness is as easy to see in the world. And I don't mean consciousness by that. I mean functional awareness and responsivity. Consciousness emerges out of mindedness, and that gets by that I mean subjective experience that's first person only. And then you get justificatory consciousness, which is what we're doing here, which is an intersubjective collective via propositional language. And that's a whole nother dimension. So a book I'm just about ready to release spells out in rich detail a new synthesis for solving the problem of psychology. And basically what it says is mindedness is a missing concept. And we're primed to reduce that to brain or behavior. The behaviors reduce it to the neuroscientists. The cognitivists put it in their information. 4E cognitive science is probably the closest, but really, I'm arguing there's even a better way than that. We are minded creatures, and you can see that behaviorally, and it is the way animals behave so differently than other entities, but we shouldn't just call that behavior, it's minded behavior. And if we get used to that, our whole grammar for being in the world will be pretty importantly changed. And so that's what I'm saying. It's not an easy lift. But there are ways to do it. It's a necessary lift. There's work to be done in upgrading our grammar.
Anton, glad we could get you
Yes,
here to
thanks.
All right, thanks.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. And yes, it was pleasure for me to read both works. And I think will be better as Max did for me
I want to say one way Greg is finessing the issue of. Okay, yeah, okay.
Sorry. And
Okay, welcome.
Thanks. To ask questions as the part of my let's see, review critique. And first of all, as Dave mentioned, and I understand that there are different views on big history. Some researchers like to expand, to divide on more stages, and as we do, for example, and as David does. And your view is to make it in a broader way and to look at a broader picture. It's also interesting. However, we all see missing Cosmos part, which is certainly the biggest part of the development. And I understand that it's not part of the concept, but still, in my point of view, Cosmos is the development is too important, and it continues to develop. And we're just part of. Earth's just part of the system of solar system and bigger systems, and where we don't know what kind of development is going on. And the process of development continues certainly not only on our planet, but in the cosmos itself. And I still think it's a good idea to include cosmotic part as the big part of the development. But just my suggestion. And I really liked uh, Craig work. But as probably many people ask you this question, how do you define culture? Because culture is a very broad, as is psychology, as you just mentioned, very broad term. And do you understand culture as usually people understand something like language and um, some cultural achievements like writing, or culture is just something which is provided by our brain development, by the civilization, because history knows that many peoples they've been developed without culture. I mean, wars were usually not because of the cultural purposes, and those who achieved better results in wars not always were the more cultural um, uh, countries or civilizations. And But of course, even wars provide some cultural development, and I mean, Roman Empire, for example. But I mean, it's interesting how you define culture, and interesting today um, because many experts, as was interesting our discussion before um, about culture as a in literature, in painting, and that is a some kind of a minimalism, and some say degradation, and but still we have development, and in many cases, and maybe we have reverse development. Uh, that's it. For me, it's interesting how you define culture and how it is. Um, what a how you describe development uh, uh, in frame of culture. And because I'm a biologist,
Sure.
I was very excited by the Tylor work, and was pleasure to read it. I really like the idea of PVS. Interesting for me, was new, and it is. I have a question about PVS meta patterns. Um, are those parts like selection, variation, propagation entangled all the time during the evolution, like you show on a on one of an image? It's like some kind of a bread, some kind of a rope entangled together, or some big parts of evolution can miss, let's say, propagation, instinctions, or variations, or selection, even because we know that selection doesn't work all the time. And let's say human civilization has problems with propagation, as well as many other species. And so, does evolution all the time need equal balance of those elements, or they just like pillars, and their uh, uh, ratio can vary during the course of evolution? And uh, of course, I'm interested in technological progress because this is the most important part of our research. And both of authors mentioned that in their book, I mean, about the future. They both mention about the importance of future technological development. But however, I wonder, both of authors, how do you think technology and your um, your evolution timeline, your patterns, they do not include technology as a separate uh, pattern, but do they include technology? And let's say culture, does it include technology? Because we think that technology is a driver which has been developing through from the very beginning of humankind, and it is probably one of the most important driver, um, as well as in Tylor's work. Um in your stages, uh, like geopolitical states or agro-villages, certainly there's part of technological development in there. Uh, Agro-villages, for sure, for example. So that's my questions and ideas.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. Maybe I'll let Tyler handle the PVSR question. I'll go to culture, and then I'll also pop into technology. Okay. Um, so speaking from where I'm coming from, this kind of gets to max things. Um, Certainly, one of my challenges is what I'm proposing is sort of a big system In fact, the whole thing's called U-Talk, which is a unified theory of knowledge. and it's also a play off of words. It's like U-Talk, which means we're kind of like we need to upgrade our language systems. And I'm giving sort of new twists on a number of different terms, like mind into mindedness. Culture's another one. So really, the key to, if you're looking at the tree of knowledge, what you're seeing there on the top is the culture person plane of existence. Okay. The culture person plane of existence is with a capital C culture. Capital C culture refers to the networks of propositions, okay, that are strung together to give rise to what are called justification systems. A justification system is a propositionally networked, mediated relationship of beliefs and values that can be negotiated between language-speaking individuals. Indeed, a person is defined as the capacity to self-consciously reflect, give justifications, and take accounts for your actions on the social stage. Okay? So what I mean by culture, capital C culture, is the capacity to justify your actions and to be socialized into a worldview. It's the network of propositions that are regulating the complex adaptive plane of a behavior of persons. Okay? Now, when you have that definition, I'm not referring to, go down to Manhattan. They got great culture in Manhattan. Okay? That is not what I'm referring to. Because you can go down to the Quakers and they'll listen and they'll gather around and they will justify what they want to do as a community every bit as much. So at the level of Quakers are hanging out at the culture person plane of existence, just like all the Manhattanites, because we're all persons engaged in a process of justification. Okay. So, and that is what is the argument, is that process gives rise to cumulative culture, self-conscious reasoning, and the evolution of networks of belief. And that is one of the key elements that turns us from hominid primates into, cultured persons. Okay. Another thing that's super crucial is the evolution of technology that you mentioned. Okay. Notice technology is not a justification system. This cup is not engaged in this conversation, but it is important to the human evolution. Indeed, we can identify the taking off of humans as the building of societies, assemblages of higher order justifications that afford collective intelligence, self-conscious reasoning in the not. And that collective intelligence affords the capacity to operate on the environment and generate complex tools, which then gives rise to the evolution of technology. Okay. So for me, human societies are the complex whole assemblage of technologies, justifications, patterns of investment, which, by the way, other animals have. That's small c culture. Other animals have shared learned patterns of investment. Okay, we know that primates do this, but they don't do it in the same way. They don't do it through cumulative justificatory capital C culture. Okay, so what we're talking about here is, what we got is the evolution of technology and justification that is pulling the human line and then ultimately coming to dominate it in the Anthropocene. The last thing I'll say is now what's happening with technology, it used to be quite separate. I said this cup doesn't really interact, but now if I ask Siri, hey Siri, what's this truth? Now all of a sudden we've created a digital information interface technology that is starting to interact with our complex adaptive plane. And we've created an internet that's now mediating our structures and artificial intelligence structures that are going to accelerate in their capacity. And we're going to create some sort of cyborg system where we're merging our justificatory person dimensions with our digital dimensions, because now digital technologies can interface because they're information processing communication network systems. And that's the ninth threshold, or what I call fifth joint point, because what that's going to mean in the 21st century is a fundamentally different relationship where the technology used to be separate. This, by the way, gets started with writing. Writing's the process by which we start to interface. And now that we got memory and information processing and then cybernetic neural network control systems at the artificial intelligence, we're going to blend our artificial intelligence with our natural intelligence, and fingers crossed that goes well. Okay.
Will it still be culture or some new realm?
Exactly. Well, I call that the digital, because according to the tree of knowledge, what you get is a different information processing communication network that's going to create the potential for another complex adaptive plane. We're right in that transitionary period. I consider us like jellyfish before the Cambrian explosion. In other words, there's neural networks that are distributed. It's going to get centralized potentially, and we better hope that goes well, because that's going to be a big transformational element. And if we start really interfacing, like Neuralink, we start dropping computers that can actually potentially, we're still decades and maybe hundreds of years, but you could certainly see that this will be a very, very big transition. So I call it the digital age, and we need digital wisdom. Okay, so digital wisdom means we better ground this evolution in a relationship to the planet, relationship to each other, and relationship to our natures, so that we actually have what I call the wisdom stack, or else this thing's going to spiral in a not so healthy and wise direction, for sure, in my estimation.
Great.
So that's my culture tech
Yeah,
frame.
thanks.
Mhm.
It's really interesting.
Tyler,
Yeah.
Oh, is Tyler frozen?
Tyler?
I think he's frozen.
Okay.
He's got a lot of good things to say about the PVSR dynamics. But trust us.
Yeah. And written it in his book, a lot of things on there. So hopefully Tyler will come back. I just want to say three things on different ties. And so ties to traditional fields, ties to previous models, and ties to the environmental interactions. So the first one, ties to traditional fields. I see unified theory of knowledge being able to connect to some of the traditional fields, matter and energies, physics and astronomy, life is biology, evolution, mind. I still think of anthropology, development of the human mind. I think you like to extend it further. That's fine. And then culture with general history. So I think that tie to traditional fields you can begin a conversation, right? And I really like the nested part of this, right? Because with a nested framework, you can start simple and then work your way down in a structured way. And I see Tyler, your connection is back. Did you want to say anything on the PVSR? Tyler?
Are you back, Tyler? I don't think so. Although it looks like he is.
Okay. We'll wait and see what's it. So I'll just finish. So that's on the ties to traditional fields.
So a couple things.
Okay. Very good. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I do want to say. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh no,
I think he's lagging some.
We can hear you.
Huh. You can you see me or hear me?
I can.
Yes,
We can.
we can hear you.
Yeah, but he's off. He's clearly not responding at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think he can hear us. Okay. Can you? That's too bad. Okay. Tyler, can you hear us? Okay. Tyler? Yeah, something's a little.
It's like his is like on a lag structure.
Yeah, I think his network connection is a little low. So
Maybe to turn off camera helps. To turn off camera, I mean, to use only microphone.
yeah, Tyler. Yeah, Tyler, do you want to try to turn off your video? Maybe use the bandwidth for audio. Yeah,
Yeah, no, he's not getting.
I think it's lagging. Is what the. So let me just finish up. Then ties to previous models. We had Max bring up the point that David Christian, really didn't think of the thresholds model as being kind of the academic model, more of the educational model, and it's been very successful at that. But I
Yes,
think
Dave. Why don't you just? Yes. Can you hear me? Am
yes,
I?
We
Can
can
you hear me?
we
yes,
can hear you.
good,
Yeah, but see,
good,
no, but it's not.
yeah,
Nothing.
Yeah, see, he's like 30 seconds
I think
behind or
he's
something.
lagging by a lot.
Hmm.
yeah. That's
That's
too
weird.
bad. So I'd like to hear the input. So
Can you hear me?
yes,
Anton, thank you. Anton, I want to say that your work, I think, fits in with ours very well because in some of your papers, you specifically talk about types of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you specifically talk about types of evolution, which is what we are dealing with here. So I want to thank you for that. I think it works really well. Um, oh, he's off. Yeah. Okay.
No, I hear.
Okay. Okay. So then it does not worth responding to his question about PBS as sub processes. So Dave, I think you should continue then. So we
so
can
yeah,
all hear you.
Anton is
Let me
here.
just answer his question. So the PVS, yes, 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 yes.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yes, he's so lagging. That's really weird.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a delay, I
I've
think.
never
I
really
think
had
he's like
problems with the
several
regular,
minutes behind,
but
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it might be easier to just get lowered and
I
mute
can turn
him,
off. You can't.
Yeah.
and
So
maybe
I
get him
think
to come
we're.
back in.
I think I'd like to open it up to
Yeah,
anybody
this has been
that would like to um, contribute to the
my video.
conversation.
My video to myself is now. My video's now off.
Okay, we can hear you. Okay, can you hear us?
So Dave, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. If you had something to say about the was it PVSR, that'd be fine if you want to.
He it's
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit delay.
yeah.
So I'd
All
like
right.
to open it up then to other people who have comments or questions. And I know some people are at the table yet. Um, and so I believe for them to ask a question, they have to raise their hand and be brought to this stage. But anybody on the stage right now can just unmute and ask a question or have a comment. Yes, Jacob.
Jacob. Mhm.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting collaboration where you both try to agree on some fundamental stages of evolution. And I think that this introduction of mind and animals is a convincing one in relation to the usual three. When I look at and Greg's paper, you have this fourfold division: matter, life, mind, culture, and you call this the periodic table of behavior. And I like this term. Um, but my question is, when you say periodic table, is this supposed to be understood in a very similar way, in the sense that these four levels tend to go through the same cycle of evolution? I mean, that's the fundamental idea of the periodic system, that there's the same tendencies when you go through the different columns. So, I mean, I'm an art historian and very interested in the evolution of culture. And I think that culture maybe has a,
You
um,
can hear me now.
Can you hear us?
Everything is,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's everybody. Dave was cut out for a long.
So I think let's go ahead with Jacob.
This,
Yes, but just to finish this idea of the periods in the columns. I mean,
Mhm.
if there's a kind of cyclicity, or do you think that there is
Right.
in these levels? So that I would think that human culture maybe has a tendency to recapitulate biological evolution, so that when you start off in lower Paleolithic, I would think that this probably animistic religion which was there
If you can hear
was
me, well,
very
it's a
much
collective. It's a
linking
collective.
linking subjects to their world, and then there is a process of autonomization through learning of human individuals, culminating in the modernity and its idea of the free individual and the Kantian idea of the autonomous mind and so on.
Mhm.
And this is kind of a gradual autonomization, and I think that maybe on the level of life, there's also been a kind of autonomization, and maybe also on the level of animals, and this could be the kind of parallel to the periods in the periodic system. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really it's a great question, and how far to take it is fascinating. So, what I am when I use the term periodic table of behavior, I am absolutely, of course, making a reference. I talk about this in my book, to the periodic table of the elements. In fact, on floor 2 is essentially atoms, and so the periodic table of the elements would fit as floor 2, and the standard theory of elementary particles is floor 1. So we would then be able to put the general periodic table of the elements. The other thing that, of course, happens with the periodic table of the elements is that the core insight is that there's columns and rows, and there's periodicity in relationship to columns and rows. I am arguing that at least the periodicity is a function of parts into wholes into groups across the dimensions. So you get a core leveling structure. There's a part that gives rise to then a consolidated whole, which then generates groups. You see that as particles into atoms, and then molecules. You see that as biological parts that get coalesced into cells that then get into multicells. You see neural networks that come together to form animals with brains, and then you get colonies. You see justification that networks into groups of persons and across societies, really cultures with a capital C, that are also organizing societies. So there is that element of periodicity. We're also saying that for life, mind, and culture, there's the whole PVSR kind of dynamic. And then the question would be, well, what richness can we pull out of there? So what I would say to you, Jacob, is that then starts to become a real set of specialization questions, where we narrow in and we really see what the historicity is. I read, the Dawn of Everything book that sort of challenged a lot of the historicity, in terms of the standard framing. So this, as far as I'm concerned, these would be the kinds of sort of expert questions, both within a discipline and then between disciplines, that we could raise issues about. I called it the periodic table of behavior precisely because it had enough correspondence and placed the periodic table of the elements on it, that I felt that it was justified in that regard. But the level of periodicity is, or the specificity to that, is a sort of a detailed and rich and ongoing question that would need lots of different scholars to take a look at and see what level of rich patterning could we extract.
All right, very good. Anybody else have a question or comment? Yeah, Ken? Oh, Ken Solis and then Ken Baskin.
Yeah, a couple of things. Just a heads up. One of the papers that would have a lot of overlap with what Tylor and Greg are doing is Dave Lepore and I had proposed for the next journal on regarding re-examining the fundamentals. Thank you. Periodization. I want to do a paper on periodization. So I've been giving it quite a bit of thought, using Tylor and Greg's great insights as well. And probably the most important thing I think that I anticipate having in the paper is that when we periodize big history, it's done by an ad hoc committee, much like geology does, because you need different perspectives, I think, to try to bridge, pedagogy and research is probably two biggest goals. And also, very importantly, is the sense of authority that would come from that type of work with a committee versus just other one or two people's opinions, to give it more authority. Secondly, nature, we found out, is extremely clever. And it's very difficult to try to come up with overriding patterns that are pervasive across space and time, and therefore our choice of words have to be careful. For example, Greg talks about the mind and how it's manifested. And correct me if I'm wrong, but behavior is an important manifestation of the mind. And of course, the question of mind versus body, or mind versus mental versus material, goes back to Rene Descartes earlier. It's something philosophy still can't wrap its head around. But anyway, as an example, it would be really difficult for an alien to look at a Venus flytrap versus a piece of coral and know which one's a plant and which one's an animal based on behavior. Um, what the nervous system, I think, fundamentally did during the Cameron explosion was allowed intracorporeal, or within the body, communication to occur much quicker than by chemical diffusion. And of course, eventually you get the brain, and now you got the information truly being processed, not just being communicated. So my main point is, um, gotta be careful with terms, which I'm sure he will be. And I think the final point I would make, if I'm not losing my thread of thought here, is I think it makes sense that we when we do periodization, and again, this is something not for me to determine, but a committee hopefully is, we do layering. So that I like the three-part eons that people tend to gravitate towards, with the physical, the life, and then instead of culture, I wrestled with this because of like you said, cetaceans and great apes have culture. But what's fundamentally different about our culture? And I think there's a lot of secondary ramifications from this besides us having meta groups, as Tyler's book pointed out, with language, and other animals make tools, but no animal makes a composite tool like we do. So my thought is that we're abstract cultures. I'm just throwing it out there again, not make a final proposal here, but trying to wrestle with what is it that fundamentally makes the differences. I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm starting to get too much into a separate thought. But those are some of my fundamental thoughts, and because again, a lot of people try to periodize a time. And it's a challenge, and I think doing what geology did with eons and two eras and periods, and it becomes more relevant as time. We change so quickly now. But so anyway, I'm just throwing that out there that Dave and I are tossing around, and certainly drawing from your work as well. And thank you for what you've done. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Ken. I really appreciate those reflections. I certainly share them in relationship to, we ought to be careful about our language. We have to define, and I'll certainly admit, a challenge that I have is I'm turning some terms in a different light. So I actually very rarely use the term "the mind." I do have a clear reference for that, but that it's different than mind and mindedness. And I'm actually, like I said, sort of not to plug this thing, but my book is on my mind. I just sent the galley proofs off. So the book, when you do that, you're like, all right, everything feeds back to that thing. But it does, though, the book does delineate all of the problems, the descriptive problems with this term, the mind, and psychology, and then gives you a much richer vocabulary so that we have the right reference. It also clarifies at least why I argue that the emergence of propositional language creates a particular kind of tipping point in the evolution of capital C culture as cumulative justificatory systems. And that is a way then to connect us to other animals in continuity, but also then disconnect what it is that And I believe it's both the justificatory evolutionary process and the cumulative technological structures that are going to pull us in very different behavioral directions, as it were, over the last 200,000 years. So, but definitely an ongoing conversation across multiple different threads and perspectives, for sure.
Good. Ken Baskin, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I found myself thinking back to Stuart Kaufman's description of evolution as the exploration of the adjacent possible.
Tap on
And,
that.
and it came across most strongly in your at the end, where you talk about exploring the key points of change that precede this sort of transformation. I think, given the nature of our existential challenge today, that's the most important thing that we can be looking at. And I wanted to put forward a pitch at some point for this group to look at that. That's what I've been finding in my own work, and I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I'll certainly second that. I like TAP a lot. It's a fascinating, that's the adjacent possible, and the exploration of adjacent possible space, how that relates to the emergence of emergence, and what does it mean for us currently is a really powerful thing. So I appreciate you raising that more myself. I certainly follow Kaufman's work and appreciate the TAP concept.
All right, very good. Are there any other questions or comments out there?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jim and then Jacob. Jim, do you want to go ahead?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can. Great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. The platform we're using isn't working. We're not. The mechanics are unfunctional right now for me, and I'm guessing for other people, although some of you are talking as if it's working. Can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have to go back to Zoom because this AirMeet thing doesn't work. And we should probably do that now and just accept that we're not communicating in a sensible way. Does that make sense?
Jim, yes. There were a lot of technical issues here, and people were being dropped. People had network problems, having delays, and a lot of community. Why we're doing this is that this is AirMeet, and this is where we're going to have our virtual conference on. And so we wanted to get experience using it and finding out those problems. And as you point out, we found, problems, issues that hopefully we can get resolved before the conference occurs. I think, for our purposes, Zoom might be a better platform. It was a little bit easier to get to, but I think we really wanted to kind of kick the tires on this one. It seems to be more sensitive to the network issues. And so apologize for that. But we really wanted to, get an idea about this platform before that conference. So I appreciate
Okay.
you being able to.
However,
Yes.
do you have the idea? It certainly isn't something we should use unless we have the technical supports to help us manage it. And we
Yes.
don't have that.
Yes, and I think we're getting the questions of why is it more sensitive to networks? What happens when someone has a delay? Why are people being dropped? And so we have the ability to ask AirMeet and find out why this is not working as smoothly as we really hoped it would be. So thank you for your
Okay.
everyone's patience on this. Very good, very nice thoughts. Jacob, did you have a question?
Yes. I was just wondering what would be the status of plants in your thresholds, Greg and Tylor? I mean, you chose animals, minded animals. What about plants? Would they be a kind of parallel development, but not leading to something to build on, or what?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So for me, plants are part of the life world. The life world, grows from, that jump some protocells into cells. And then we have the eukaryotic expansion and multicellularity. And we get fungi and plants as, complex multicellular cytology, botany, science studies those structures. There's a lot of complex adaptive intelligence there. But I think the biological sciences and the concept of life captures that kind of complexity. I'm arguing that with the nervous system, animals are coming off of that and adding they tap into, to use a Kaufman, they tap into another layer of complex adaptive design space when they start moving and interacting with each other at a higher order. And that is not to say that all animals are more complex than all plants, no way. But it is to say that mindedness comes off of life as another dimension of complexification, not unlike life comes off of matter. So plants sit as living organisms, some amazingly complex, amazingly networked. The intelligence of trees, as it were, I'm very, very open to those concepts for sure. But it is different to behave as a squirrel or a bee than it is to behave even as a Venus flytrap. Even the carnivorous plants don't exhibit the same kind of sensory motor looping functional awareness in real time that animals do. So the mindedness simply is another dimension on top of living structures. But living structures exhibit a lot of complex adaptive intelligence, and we can talk about how you might want to use that word or might not. But that's what I would say. But certainly it's a respect for the complexity of plants for sure can be embedded in that model.
If you allow, I would jump into this question, and maybe it's also more for Tylor's work. But talking about complexity of plants, do you think it's possible to talk about some social abilities of plants? In Tylor's work, there's a point that social groups repeat each other at different stages, animals, humans, and insects. But there are a lot of evidence that fungi and plants have social life. Great book about this, The Secret Life of Trees by Colin Tudge. He describes how plants can support each other and how they help elderly plants and things like that. Uh, do you think it's possible, maybe not that level of complexity, but still see such things as social life of plants and this complex behavior?
I don't know if Tyler's online with us here, but my short answer to that is certainly from my vantage point, yes, I am not a botanist or a cytologist, but I follow these literatures and I see just a lot of evidence for a complex adaptive network. And so the I'm myself certainly I'm both open to that. I'll bring a normal skepticism to it from a scientific perspective. I would not say that plants are conscious in this sense of they have inner experiences of being, which I do believe you need a nervous system for, but they show functional awareness and responsivity to the world around them. So depending on what's your referent for consciousness, I think plants show a functional awareness and responsivity. That plants would be networked together in relationship to cooperative networks seems quite plausible to me. I think we probably underestimated how much complex adaptive systemic intelligence are in plants and fungi. And I think that we're opening up some of those lines of research now. And from my vantage point, there's nothing inside of my system that would like shrink away from that or diminish that or be overly skeptical to that. I would be a bit skeptical to the idea that there's something to like that it is like to be a tree, because everything that at least I know, at least in a grounded, natural, coherent ontology, the experience of being is something that is a function of the nervous system. But that doesn't mean that you don't have functional awareness and responsivity. And if you mean consciousness by that, then plants are conscious in that sense, for sure.
Yeah. Max?
Just to add on to that discussion, I wanted to ask, both you and Tyler, Greg, talked about kind of your system as being a kind of Parks to culture, sort of how we got to being human. And you talk about aggregations or aggregates rather than levels and realms. I wonder, my thought was that your system could be applied theoretically to the discussion of alien life or stuff like that. It's not kind of exclusively for the rise of humans, which I thought was, a great thing. I wonder whether you feel that plants fit into the aggregation part of it,
Well,
or whether they fit into the combogenesis process.
Well, certainly all right, let's be clear about what there's the leveling process that's part of combogenesis. So at the level, if we're tracking the development of sort of protocells and biological parts, they get consolidated into cells. Then you get eukaryotic cells, and then you get multicellularity. At least we're following the combogenesis trail to us. So plants are part of that, trail, in the sense that certainly from quarks to culture, multicellularity and big life is part of our trail. Okay, it's also the case that so there's a leveling process. There's also aggregation, which is part of the dimension. We're simply differentiating. There's certain kinds of emergence that are best characterized as aggregation, and certain other ones that are characterized by levels. Often levels are a kind of aggregation. So I'm certainly, we're including the capacity to consider aggregation and levels. We're simply differentiating combogenesis line from other kinds of complexification. The cosmos, which I think is super important. I just think we need to be clear about what we're referring to, whether we're pulling out our history line, the big history of us versus the big history of the cosmos writ large is a different referent. And so combogenesis is a big history of us, and we want to be clear about that. We want to be open to other histories. Certainly I'm open to aliens, whatever. But we want to be clear that what we learn about us may or may not translate there. We want to be clear about what learns us, and we want to see what would potentially translate. I'm a inherent skeptic. I actually argue my system's very conservative. I'm very skeptical. I don't know what the hell aliens might, the universe could generate all sorts of different kinds of complexification. But we have an N of 1 here, and we're going to, we can wonder what we can generalize about from it, for sure.
All right, Claudio, do you have a question? Yes.
Yes, some comments actually. Well, this idea of studying better the evolution of life on Earth in order to possibly understand the evolution of life on other planets, exoplanets, is precisely the leading thread in my book, Evo Ceti. Now, I have to be frank with all of you, my friends. First of all, I have to apologize because my book is horribly mathematical. And so this has withdrawn the participation of many people. I should have used words more than equations. But the clear reason for that is quite simply because my publisher, which is Springer Verlag, was pushing me to publish this big work, 800 pages or whatever, in a short time. And so I did. But actually, I am considering writing something else, some kind of a popular description, not so much mathematics, just the results, but not the proof in the details, and then apply that to the largest fields possible. Now, there is another error, so as to say, that I made. The title of the book. The title of the book is Evo Seti, meaning evolution and SETI. I think that displeased everybody. It certainly displeased the SETI search scientists, because the vast majority of them are observational scientists. So they regarded this book as, a lot of theory and no practical result, essentially. I'm really sorry about that, because I failed the number one goal of the idea, that is to go over from life on Earth to life on exoplanets. So this is the first point. The second point is that if I can, in the future, write a sort of popular book, popular version of all these results, then I would certainly change the title. Evo Seti is too ambitious. And if you ask me, why did you call it like that? It's because about 20 years ago or more, I enjoyed very much the David Attenborough description of the evolution of life on Earth, which was, of course, popular. It was understandable by everybody. So the conclusion of my talk here is very easy. I still hope that I can give a popular version of all that, detached from the calculations, and apply that not only to history, but also to the lives of historical important people that should be translated into evoentropy mathematics. Basically, let me just tell you this. We know, for instance, that Mozart had a short life, but he did wonderful work. Now, one of the points in my book is this one. If you give me the time of birth of a person and the time of death of that person, then you only need one more detail, that is the time of the peak of the production of that guy. And just to complete on Mozart, we of course know when he died and when he was born and when he died. Now, in my opinion, the peak was around 1788, when he produced the better musical pieces. Now, the point is that in these intended future books, I would describe in popular terms this application of mathematics also to the life of real people that really existed, in order to give a certain ground to have more application in the future. Thank you.
Okay.
So can you hear me now, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Still.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's really weird.
Yeah.
He's just frozen like 30 seconds behind or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I think we're going to have to wrap things up here.
Okay.
And I really want to thank Greg and Tylor for putting this together. I think it was a very good discussion. I also like to thank Max and Anton for being respondents, and to Lowell for trying this platform out. We see that there's some issues, but I think we want to know that before the conference. Also want to say a little that Max, you're going to have a webinar in about 2 weeks, right? Energy, the currency of the universe. So I think that is of interest to all of us. It's Monday, December 5 at 10 Eastern time. So Max, if just remember that when you have a current audience there, just remember that it's being recorded and putting on the website, and a lot of people can watch it after that also. So it's always a good resource. It's not just the people watching it live. but that should be very interesting. It's 2 weeks from Monday. Max, I think it's already Monday by you, right? Is it Monday? Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, I
okay.
think it's
So
10
2 weeks from
p.m.
now.
Just for clarity, it's 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Oh, yes. Very good.
Yeah, so I think probably a lot of people won't be able. And I think Anton, I tried to make it so it kind of comes across both time zones, but they're both pretty rubbish times. So I think it's 6 or 7 a.m.
It'll
for
be
you.
recorded and put on the IBHA web page. So, and then the question for the topic for next one, did anybody have any other ideas? I mentioned the SETI or the Great Filter. I think we have a lot of material on that. Some videos from the conference that was in Milan a couple of years ago. We've had some reviews of some of the papers in the emergence. I think there's a lot of material there from this group or from IBHA. And I would encourage each of you to kind of think about, what information from Big History could contribute to SETI, or what can come from SETI and apply to Big History, make it more general if we actually see anything, or what do we expect, and what are the questions, because the questions are really important, and we try to figure things out. Anybody else have any ideas for the next time? And so if you do, just send me an email, and we'll go from there. I'll start putting some materials together on that. And if someone has other ideas, that would be fine also. Anybody else have any final comments?
I'll just say thanks a lot to Tylor. I'm sorry that he's had some trouble in the interaction, but he's been a great collaborator. I will make an announcement. If any, Tylor's going to present and a few others. I'm building a conference called Consilience, Unifying Knowledge, Orienting Towards Wisdom. And I've got some people with big history leanings in that regard. If people are interested in that, shoot me a note. Tylor is going to be presenting on it's our work together. So I'll just mention that, and feel free to reach out to me if anybody has any questions about what I'm doing and would like to follow up.
Very good. Thank you.
Just another kind of notice board item. The World History Conference is in Pittsburgh next year. I think it's the 25th of June, 22nd of June to the 25th. I went last year, and they kind of asked me where all the big history people have gone. Their theme is energies, so I thought it might be a good year for us to maybe try and put a panel in. So maybe people have a bit of a think about that. And I think it's not due till January, the submission, so we can maybe have a discussion over email. But if anyone's interested, shoot me an email.
All right, sounds good.
Anybody else? Otherwise, again, thanks to everyone for participating. I know that I've learned a lot from this, from thinking about it, thinking how to approach it, and I think we have a good direction to go.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.